So we've been looking at Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, and how it relates to us as believers. It's for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. We saw how it was intentionally mistranslated by the King James translators. They were coerced by the rules that had been laid down for them to follow, so they had to do that, but we looked at that. And we looked at the translation in the Geneva translation uh, as our jumping off point for what it's saying here. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, and against the worldly governors, the princes of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness which are in high places. So we looked at how we're told that the worldly government is the enemy, but they're not the only enemy. And in this world today, we have seen an acceleration of evil that was unknown, or at least mostly unknown, to our parents and grandparents. However, they were known to our distant ancestors, and they seem to be making a comeback. In the book of Zephaniah, which is probably not one that you read every day, chapter 2, verse 11, it says, "The Lord will be terrible unto them, for he will famish all the gods of the earth, and men shall worship him, every one from his place, even all the isles of the heathen. And in Rotherham's emphasized version, it says, "Terrible will be Yahweh, be against them, for he hath caused to waste away all the gods of the earth, that men may bow down to him, every one from his place, all the coastlands of the nations." So do you see what this is talking about here? Now, when you see the word Lord in the King James Version, when it's in all caps like this, it's translated from Yahweh. Yahweh will be terrible against them, for he has caused all the gods of the earth to waste away or to famish. Their food's going to be cut off, and it may also mean that their land will be diminished, and it could be spiritual as well as physical. So yeah, but he's Elohim. This is talking about false gods. That's what most people say when you point this out to them. But this word translated as gods in this verse, that is the word Elohim. So let me ask you, do you really believe what the Bible says? You say, what kind of question is that? Of course I believe it. Well, it seems like an odd question because the Bible is probably read by most Christians, at least to an extent. But do you believe it? The Bible has some really weird stuff in it, especially compared to what we think we know to be true today. And not things such as whether or not Jesus came to earth, was crucified, and resurrected, not the miracles performed by God through Moses, the parting of the Red Sea and on into the desert. Although sadly, there are many believers today who think that those are just allegories and were not real. But most people believe those things. And seriously, if you don't believe those things, how can you even claim to be a Christian? But what about the weird stuff? Now, I've heard preachers, they would be reading through a passage, and they would come to something weird, and they'd say, well, this part's too weird right here. We're going to skip over this. Well, I think God's point is that if it's weird, you should pay extra attention to it. So, do you believe the Bible, including the stuff that you rarely hear about in church? And you say, yeah, but that's just one verse. Well, let's take a look at 1 Kings chapter 22, verses 19 through 23. Now, this is talking about Ahab, a wicked king of Israel. And he said, "Hear thou therefore the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the hosts of heaven standing by him on his right hand and on his left. And the Lord said, Who shall persuade Ahab that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said in this manner, and another said in that manner. And there came forth a spirit and stood before the Lord and said, I will persuade him. And the Lord said unto him, Wherewith? How are you going to persuade him? And he said, I will go forth, and I will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. And he said, Thou shalt persuade him, and prevail also. Go forth and do so. Now therefore, behold, the Lord hath put a lying spirit in the mouth of all these thy prophets, and the Lord hath spoken evil concerning thee." So this is talking about Ahab. He was a wicked king of Israel. He had already gone up against his enemy twice. He's wanting to go a third time. He's very self-confident. He's full of self-esteem, and he wants to ally his forces with that of Judah and attack an enemy at Ramoth Gilead. So Judah's king wants to know what's going to happen if they attack. So the two kings ask Ahab's prophets, and they say, well, everything's all good to go. You're going to win. They're all excited about it. But the prophets that were around Ahab, they were simply yes men. And they were telling them what they wanted to hear, and the kings both knew it. So they asked Micaiah, whose name means, who is like Yah? And he was the prophet of the God. Ahab hated this guy because he never said anything good about Ahab. And what he says now is not going to be very flattering either compared to what the yes men prophets had to say. But looking at this passage, do you see here what the Bible wants you to believe? It says that God meets with a group of spirit beings to decide what happens on earth. Did he need to do that? No, he could have done it all. He's omnipotent. But that was his will, to have fellowship with these beings, to give them the choice. Think about it. So let's look at another example. In Jude, verse 6, and the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness, unto the judgment of the great day. So the Bible expects you to believe that God actually sent a bunch of angels to prison. Really? Yeah, really. And you better believe it because God said it. So there are a lot of weird things in the Bible, and everyone always says, well, make it relevant to today. I'm telling you right now, this is relevant to today. Most Christians don't have a problem with a little bit of supernatural stuff, at least the ones that aren't controversial. Things such as who Jesus is and what he did. But when you come across passages like these, most believers start to feel kind of uneasy, and they either ignore them or they try to turn them into allegories and say, well, it doesn't really mean that. You know, many believers, or probably most believers, believe in good angels, but a lot of them think that demons aren't real. They're both very real. The supernatural world is very real, and it impacts you daily, whether you like it or not. But weird things just don't fit the theology of those who want a feel-good message. Now, you should feel good when you read and when you study the Bible, but that doesn't mean that it's always going to be easy or comfortable. 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 18 through 20. For Christ also hath once suffered for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but quickened by the Spirit, by which also he went and preached unto the spirits in prison, which sometimes were disobedient, when once the long suffering of God waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was preparing, wherein few, that is, 8 souls, were saved by water. So who were these spirits? Why were they imprisoned? There's some who say that those are the spirits of the unsaved who died, and Jesus is just sort of saying, told you so. Jesus is not cruel and taunting in that way. The reality of this situation is what makes people uncomfortable. They either don't see what is being said, or they don't want to see what is being said. Now, the Bible tells us who these spirits are, and we can figure out that Jesus is showing them this has been the plan all along. And as we're going to see later, these spirits were also working behind the scenes to thwart God's plans while they were in prison, and instead, they helped further God's plans. But these weird passages are very important. They teach very specific ideas that we need to understand. If you're aware of them and if you understand what they mean, it's going to change the way that you think about God. It'll make you think about why we're here, and it's going to make you think about our ultimate destiny. Now, in the passage in 1 Kings, we saw God's divine counsel. This is weird. At least it's weird since we've always been taught that God is all powerful and can do anything, and so, of course, does not need a counsel. This is something that's supernatural. So what does the term mean, and where does it come from? So if you're focused solely on text and evidence, it may not make any sense at first. But it does make sense once you study the Bible, and if you believe the Bible, and you put it all together. And you may well ask, why is this important? And the short answer is, if it weren't important, it wouldn't be in the Bible. But these things are real. They're in the Bible. They inform our study of the Bible. They should inform our prayer life. And like it or not, they inform our understanding of the world. Now, there is a God, capital G, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Adonai. But they're also gods, plural, little letter G. The word gods is simply a translation of the Hebrew word Elohim when referring to the God. Although a plural word, he is a trinity, singular pronouns are used, such as he is a trinity. However, it sometimes refers to multiple other beings, such as the gods of the nations, the gods of Egypt, things like that. So the word Elohim in plural form, in English, we add an S or an ES usually, but it can be either plural or singular, and is used more than 2,000 times in the Old Testament, and it's singular, referring to God of Israel. We have words like this in English. The word deer can be either singular or plural. If I see the word deer by itself, not can be confused with my wife, but deer is in the animal, you would not know if it's one deer or a herd of deer. But in a sentence that you would know based upon the verbs and pronouns, I would say the deer is injured. You know, that's one deer. The deer are all eating my crops. No, that's multiple deer. So the grammar lets us know which Elohim is one and which Elohim is multiple. Hebrew does the same thing. So as Christians, we describe ourselves as being monotheistic, worshiping one God, because we believe in one God, the one true God. And that's compared to polytheism, which is the worship of many gods. We say the pagans believe in many gods, while we believe in only one God, but the Bible doesn't actually speak in those terms. We find many references to other gods. Now, when we think of false gods, we tend to think in terms of made-up idols. However, false does not mean not real, but it means not the true God. It's erroneous. There are gods of Canaan among other false gods. So the word Elohim in its plural form refers to supernatural beings. It's the plural of the word Eloah, which means a powerful superhuman being, and the plural form is used thousands of times more than the singular. The word Eloah comes from the word El, and that word is used for the God many times, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But the word refers more to strength and power, and therefore, words that are derived from it denotes power that goes beyond natural human strength. But you need to get it out of your head that it refers to only one being or thing. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God, Elohim, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is the first sentence in the Bible, and it's clearly referring to the God. In verse 2, we're told the conditions on earth, and in verse 3, he starts speaking to creation. Those who teach the prosperity gospel, they're going to teach that if God used words to speak things into existence, then we too should use words to speak things into existence, whether we want wealth, a spouse, whatever. The Bible doesn't say that things were created because God spoke them into existence, but they came into being because God spoke them into existence. It says, in the beginning, God. Before time was created, before anything was created, God existed. Exodus chapter 12, verse 12. For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn of the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt, the Elohim of Egypt, I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. So this use of the word Elohim is obviously not about the one true God, but it's about the supernatural beings of Egypt. And these were not figments of the imagination. They're very real beings, but they are not the true God. 1 Samuel chapter 28, verses 10 through 14. And this is where Saul went to visit the witch at Endor. And Saul sware to her by the Lord, saying, as the Lord liveth, there shall no punishment happen to thee for this thing. Then said the woman, whom shall I bring up unto thee? And he said, bring me up Samuel. And when the woman saw Samuel, she cried with a loud voice, and the woman spake to Saul, saying, Why hast thou deceived me? For thou art Saul. And the king said unto her, Be not afraid, for what sawest thou? And the woman said unto Saul, I saw gods. I saw Elohim existing out of the earth. And he said unto her, What form is he of? And she said, An old man cometh up, and he's covered with the mantle. And Saul perceived that it was Samuel, and he stooped with his face to the ground and bowed himself. But it says here that she saw gods. The Targums, which are the Aramaic translation of the Hebrew, it says she saw an angel of the Lord. It's a divine being. It's Elohim. Now, this word can apply in many different ways, not only to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Genesis chapter 2, verse 31. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. This is where Jacob wrestled with a man, and he prevailed, and he stated that he has seen the face of God. But in Hosea 12, verse 4, where it's talking about this situation, it says, yes, he wrestled with the angel and prevailed. He wept and saw his favor. So it's the same thing. He says God, he's seen the angel, these are Elohim. And when the text says a man, that's a reference to someone who at least has the appearance of a man, not necessarily a human being. In each case, whether this was a direct encounter with God or with the pre-incarnate Messiah or the angel of the Lord, they all refer to God, Elohim, divine beings. So to the ancient person, a God was simply a supernatural being. It could be a God as we understand it. It could be an angelic being. It could be a dead man raised back to life by a sorcerer. It could be a necromancer practicing witchcraft or anything similar to that. Now, in the Old Testament, when we see the phrase the sons of God, it always has a reference to supernatural beings. That changes in the New Testament, but in the Old Testament, it's always true. Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Now it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Now, we're going to look at this passage in much more depth later on down the line, but this is just building upon our idea here, the concept. But this is talking about the angels intermarrying with humans. And people say, oh, that's just the sons of Cain interbreeding with the sons of Seth. And that's a view that many within the church like to take. Where I went to school, they taught that. But this is a weird passage. They don't like it. It makes them uncomfortable. But saying this is the sons of Cain interbreeding with the sons of Seth makes no sense in the context, and it makes no sense in the grammar. I've heard some preachers who actually understood that it was referring to angels, and they say that when they took them, it was by force. Well, the grammar and the context both say it was voluntary and it was approved by the families. They were voluntarily doing these things, worshiping these false gods. Now, how do we know that these were angels? We're going to jump ahead to the book of Job here. We're going to read chapter 1, verses 6 through 12. It said, Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. And the Lord said to Satan, From where do you come? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From roaming about on the earth and walking around on it. And the Lord said to Satan, Have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil. Then Satan answered the Lord, Does Job fear God for nothing? Hast thou not made a hedge about him and his house and all that he has on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But put forth thy hand now and touch all that he has. He will surely curse thee to thy face. Then the Lord said to Satan, Behold, all that he has is in your power, only do not put forth your hand on him. So Satan departed from the presence of the Lord. I don't think the descendants of Seth showed up with Satan in the throne room of God. But it says that the sons of God came and presented themselves. The Septuagint says the angels of God. And until modern history, no one really thought that this was weird. God even asked Satan about Job, so we have some information about Job and his blamelessness. Because of that, we know that Job had a good life with a lot of stuff. But God allowed him to lose everything, and he had some pretty bad friends who gave him some bad advice, or at least questionable advice. But we know how it all turned out in the end. But this story establishes us for us that the sons of God are a class of beings that are related to Satan. And then after the events in chapter 1, Satan causing bad things to befall Job. Then in chapter 2, there's a replay of this, and Satan is given the okay to touch his body but not take his life. When you get to the end of the book, the Lord is talking to Job, and he answers Job out of the whirlwind and said, "Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and answer thou me. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding. Who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest? Or who has stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Or who shut up the sea with doors when it brake forth, as if it had issued out of the womb? When I made the cloud, the garment thereof, and thick darkness a swaddling band for it, and break up for it my decreed place, and set bars and doors, and said, Hitherto shalt thou come, but no further, and here shall thy proud ways be stayed. So verse 7 once again uses sons of God, and this passage is about the creation. God laid the foundations of the earth, and he set its measurements, and he laid his cornerstone. And then in verse 7, he tells us that the time of the creation was when the sons of God shouted for joy. There's no reference to this text to humankind. This is a time that occurred before humankind. God was still in the process of creation, yet the sons of God were shouting for joy. These are supernatural beings. These are not men. Exodus 15:11. Who is like thee among the gods, O Lord? Who is like thee, majestic in holiness, awesome in praises, working wonders? This is from the Song of Moses and Miriam. This is just after Pharaoh's chariots were cast into the sea and Israel was saved. Then it asks, who is like you, Yahweh, among the gods? Psalm 82. We're going to take a look at this whole chapter. It's a short chapter. It's only 8 verses. This is a Psalm of Asaph. It says, God standeth in the congregation of the mighty. And this says the assembly of the gods. The New Revised Standard Version says the divine council. But God standeth in the congregation of the gods. He judgeth among them. He's in the midst of the gods. And this is the word Elohim. This says, how long will you judge unjustly? Or how long will you judge perversely and accept or show favoritism to the persons of the wicked? Selah. Defend the poor and fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and needy. Deliver the poor and needy. Rid them out of the hand of the wicked. They know not, neither will they understand. They walk on in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are out of course. I have said, you are gods, you are Elohim, and all of you are sons of the Most High. But ye shall die like men and fall like one of the princes. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for thou shalt inherit all nations. This passage is one that really showed to me that when it's weird, we need to take a look at it. This was shown to me that there are many gods, although there's only one God. This is the clearest example of a divine council anywhere in the Bible, except for one. Verse 1 here says that God has taken his place in this divine council or divine assembly. The first Elohim is singular. This is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. However, the second one is plural. The first one shows an individual that stands, whereas the second one shows that he stands in the midst of others. So there are multiple gods in the second. This is a gathering, it's an assembly. An assembly, by definition, requires multiple beings. Our assembly, when we meet together, has to have more than one person, right? Whether we're online or if we're in person, if you have an assembly, it takes more than just you. But it says that God takes his place in this divine assembly. So what does he do there? He holds judgment in the midst of the gods. What gods? It says, how long will you judge unjustly and accept the persons of the wicked? And this word accept to show favoritism to is lift up their face. They're unjust, but you're going to show favoritism to them anyway. This is why there are so many preachers and teachers that try to say this is about human rulers and judges and not about divine beings. They try to say that the plural Elohim gods is talking about human kings and judges. Usually they try to say Jewish people. Whoever these gods are, they're unjustly ruling. Following this, verses 3 through 5 explains the plight of those who are being oppressed as being weak. They're treated unfairly. They're walking in ignorance and they're being treated unjustly. Then verse 6 says, I have said, you are gods, and all of you are sons of the Most High. And as much as kings and rulers in this world want to be considered as a son of God, that's only wishful thinking. This verse says that they are gods and they are the Son of the Most High. And then verse 7 says, but you shall die like men and fall like one of the princes. The word for men here is the word that means humankind, not like a man as opposed to a woman, but as a human being. Human rulers, they don't need to be told that they're going to die like a human. They already know that. There would be no purpose whatsoever in warning humans that they're human if they're the target of God's judgment. But supernatural divine beings, they don't die like human beings in the normal order of things. So God is judging them for failing to judge justly. So they are going to die just as human dies. The Bible tells us clearly that there are other gods. And how do we read our Bibles for years and decades and we never see that? It's not simply idols. God is not a part of a group of idols, but he does stand among an assembly of divine beings. These other gods were being condemned for being corrupt in the way that they administer the nations of the earth. God never appointed a council of human elders to rule over the nations, and he certainly was not condemning the Trinity. But this passage does parallel the writings of other cultures as well as other places in the Bible. We're told that there is a hierarchy, and this hierarchy is mirrored in the promises that were given. To use a worldly example, Egypt had a bureaucracy. The pharaohs typically had large extended families, and family members were appointed to key positions of authority. They were not just simply administrators, they were important. And this structure of a layered authority had a king with administrators who were usually related to the king. Then it had low-level personnel who served the higher levels of authority. And everyone in the system was part of the government. But authority and status were tiered. Everyone else was on the outside. And that's what this passage here in Psalm 82 is describing. To a biblical writer, the term Most High, it's the Hebrew word Elyon, that was the God of Israel. The Old Testament refers to him as Most High in many different places. And the sons of God are called Elohim because the pronouns you in verse 6 is plural. It's y'all. So the Most High is among multiple Elohim. Now, the context of this passage doesn't make it clear whether all of the Elohim are in trouble or just some of them. The Elohim, they rule the nations under God's authority, and the Bible doesn't make it clear whether all of them failed or just some of them failed. And this is a biblical concept that we're going to look at shortly, so don't leave this yet. We're going to come back to this in a minute. But don't make the mistake of thinking that this passage teaches polytheism or worship of multiple gods, because it does make people uncomfortable, so it's often glossed over, and translators often try to obscure what is being said. This is not teaching worship of multiple gods, just that there are multiple divine beings. Psalm 89, verses 5 through 7. This is taken from the NET Bible. And it says, O Lord, the heavens praise your amazing deeds, as well as your faithfulness in the angelic assembly. For who in the skies can compare to the Lord? Who is like the Lord among the supernatural beings, the gods? A God who is honored in the great angelic assembly and more awesome than all who surround him. And for technical reasons that we're not going to go spend time on right here, this translation translates the word saints as angelic because of context. In the Old Testament, the word saints can refer to God's people or their leaders, which is different than the New Testament. But in the context of heaven here, it's a divine assembly. They cannot be human beings in this context. Now, this is a different context in the New Testament. It's used differently, so don't get confused about that. But this is an assembly in the heavens, not on the earth. It makes no sense to think of them as humans. There's no reference in the Bible to a council of human beings that are serving Yahweh in the skies. What we see in Psalms 82 and 89 describes precisely what we saw in the book of Job. There are those who claim that Judaism evolved from polytheism to monotheism. If you understand what the word Elohim means, you can't think that. Because the word is translated usually as God with a big G, we tend to automatically look at a divine being that is omnipotent, sovereign, omnipresent, everything like that. But the word itself does not mean that. The word simply means a divine being with no specific set of attributes. There are many different beings referred to as Elohim that are not equal. You have Yahweh, you have Yahweh's council, you have gods and goddesses of other nations, you have demons, you have Samuel that was called a god. He was dead, and angels are referred to as gods. So the word itself does not imply polytheism. And would any biblical writer believe that the human dead and demons are on the same level as Yahweh? No, they wouldn't. They were not polytheistic. They were always monotheistic. We just use the word, or we think of the word the wrong way. Using this word doesn't mean that there's an interchangeable group of deities. There is one true God, but there are many Elohim. Now, there are many things that the Bible says about Yahweh that are never said about any other divine being. He is always presented as being unique and incomparable to any other entity. He's all powerful. He's sovereign over the other Elohim. He's the creator of the other members of the council, and he is the only one who deserves worship from the other Elohim. Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 6 says, Thou, even thou art Lord alone, thou hast made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their hosts, the earth, and all things that are therein, the seas, and all that is therein. And thou preservest them all, and the hosts of heaven worshipeth thee. So as long as you remember that the word Elohim is not about specific attributes, but it simply refers to inhabitants of the supernatural world, it's simple to understand. And you must remember that in the spiritual realm, there's a hierarchy. Yahweh is an Elohim, but no other Elohim is Yahweh. Just because they're spiritual doesn't mean that an Elohim cannot interact with the human world. Divine beings have in the past, and they're doing so now, and they will in the future, but they will assume a physical human form, and they could even take on flesh in order to interact with people. Now, that's not their normal estate. That's not their natural state of being, because spirits are spirits. In the same way, humans can be transported to the divine realm, but that's not our normal place where we live. That's not where we exist. So Elohim kind of refers to a place or a residence for these divine beings. Now, there are those who preach and teach that the gods are simply idols of wood or stone. They teach that they're not real. Those are false teachers. The Bible clearly tells us that they are real, and it makes no sense, and it shows that these teachers have no understanding of the rationale of idolatry and what is behind idolatry. Deuteronomy 32:17. This day is talk about the Israelites. But the Israelites sacrificed unto demons. This is from the word shedim. So the Israelites sacrificed to these demons, not to God, but to gods whom they knew not, to new gods that came newly up, whom your fathers feared not. So this verse explicitly calls the Elohim they worshiped demons. These demons were guardians of the areas around where the Israelites now found themselves, and they liked the power and the prestige that they represented. So they started sacrificing to these demons. These Shadim are not simply blocks of wood or stone, they are real beings. The blocks of wood or stone, they might represent their presence in order to sacrifice to them, but they were not imaginary beings. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 20, Paul is following this story, and he says, "But I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I would not that you should have fellowship with demons." So he's following this story of the Israelites that's described in Deuteronomy 32. And he warns against fellowship with demons because Israel had failed and they had worshiped other gods. Paul uses the word for demon that refers specifically to an evil supernatural being in order to translate the word Shadim in Deuteronomy 32:17. Paul knew his Bible, and he did not deny the reality of the Shadim, who are a type of Elohim. So back to the beginning of the Bible. Genesis 1:26. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So here's that plural language again. Us, our. Now, I was taught in Bible school that this is the royal we. That's an individual. We are the king. And it was the Father conversing with the Son, and usually throwing the Holy Spirit in there for good measure. But that's not in the text. The Godhead, they share in the divine equally. They don't need to have a conversation with themselves. This is a reference to the divine council who's speaking to the heavenly host, just he did in 1 Kings 22 that we looked at. Genesis chapter 3, verses 22 through 24. And the Lord God said, "Behold, the man has become as one of us, to know good and evil. And now lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from whence he was taken. So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubim and a flaming sword which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life." Now, this is just a thought about this passage here, but because of the language, and we know that there's a good possibility that the Garden of Eden was located in an area at the bottom that is now covered by the waters of the Persian Gulf. Did you ever wonder about that flaming sword? What's its purpose now? And why does it say keep the way? Technically, it says keep the way to the tree of life and not block the way. That's just something for you to think about. We'll look at that at some point in the future eventually, but just think about that. What's the importance of that? It's important. But in this passage here, we once again see the plural language. Man had become as one of us. He's speaking to other heavenly beings. Genesis chapter 11, verse 1 through 9. Now, this is the story of the Tower of Babel. We're going to read it right now. We're going to look at this deeper later. But it says, "And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build us a city, and a tower, whose top may reach into heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build a city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. First of all, there's the plural language again. Let us go down. As a result of this, God confused the languages of mankind. This was done to accomplish the scattering of the people. Without being able to communicate, the people would be divided. Evil seems to gather in cities, and God had told them to spread out. He had not told them to go build cities. Now, we're going to turn to Deuteronomy. This is where we're going to start winding down for the evening here. We're going to read verses 1 through 6. It says, "Give ear, O ye heavens, and I will speak, and hear. O earth, the words of my mouth, and hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. My doctrine shall drop as the rain, my speech shall distill as the dew, as a small rain upon the tender herb, and as the showers upon the grass. Because I will publish the name of the Lord. Ascribe ye greatness unto our God. He is the rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are judgment, a God of truth and without iniquity, just and right is he. They have corrupted themselves. Their spot is not the spot of his children. They are a perverse and crooked generation. Do you thus requite the Lord, O foolish people and unwise? Is not he thy father that hath bought thee? Hath he not made thee and established thee?" So we mentioned the Song of Moses in Exodus 15 earlier. That was the first one. There's another one, and that's in this passage here in Deuteronomy 32. This is the Song of Moses. And this is written just before he was taken by the Lord. He's saying this to all the people here. This is an exaltation of the name of Yahweh and ascribing greatness to him. Then the people of Israel after that are harshly condemned. Verses 7 through 8. "Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask thy father, and he will show thee. Thy elders, and they will tell thee. When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the sons of God." Now, in the Masoretic text, which was used for the King James and many other translations, verse 8 says sons of Israel. It says God set the boundaries of the people according to the number of the sons of Israel. That makes no sense. When he divided the nations and separated the people, there were no sons of Israel. In fact, Abraham didn't even exist at that point. Now, I've heard some try to defend this because God, knowing the future, was able to set the boundaries according to what their future state was going to be. But the text doesn't indicate this. Neither does Genesis 11 when you read that. Now, we do know that the manuscript from which the Masoretes copied the text was intentionally altered. The Masoretes themselves, they copied what they were given faithfully, but the source text was modified from the original. The rabbis hated Jesus, and they wanted to obscure the fact that he was the Messiah. There were also some weird passages that they wanted to make less weird. Plus, there were other places where they wanted to make Israel look stronger or more important. There's not a lot of alterations, and we have figured out where most of them were, often by referring to the Septuagint, which was copied from older manuscripts than the Masoretic. But there are also the Dead Sea Scrolls, which have been miraculously preserved for more than 2,000 years. The Septuagint does not read sons of Israel as it would if the Hebrew text had originally had that. Instead, it reads angels of God. And the Dead Sea Scrolls has sons of God. The NET Bible says divine assembly, but that's interpretation based upon the context. but he separated these nations among the sons of God. This is a land reference. It's a map. This makes sense, and it's according with the oldest sources. If you read Genesis 11 again, we see that the divine council was involved with the scattering of the peoples at the Tower of Babel. Therefore, God divided up people according to the number of the heavenly beings. Deuteronomy 32:9. For the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is a lot of his inheritance. This is Israel. They're Yahweh's portion. The nations were not divided up to them. They were part of that division. He got that part. The sons of God got the rest. Deuteronomy 32, verses 12, and then verses 16 through 17. So the Lord alone did lead him, and there was no strange God with him. They provoked him to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations provoked they him to anger. They sacrificed unto demons, not to God, to gods whom they knew not, to new gods that came newly up, whom your fathers feared not. This says they had no foreign God among them. They provoked him with strange gods and they sacrificed the demons. Now, there's more to this that we're not going to look at tonight. We'll pick up on it later. But the rest of this chapter is a prophecy of how Israel is going to turn away. They will make him jealous with foreign gods, and he will avenge his servants. And the end of this song is verse 43. And it promises that the nations will rejoice with Israel, his people, for he will repay and make atonement for his land and for his people. At the beginning of the covenant at Sinai, the 10 commandments were given, and it says to have no other gods. That would be an absolutely, completely nonsensical statement if there were no other gods. And if all it referred to is idolatry, that would be covered by the next commandment that says not to make an idol. But the world was divided up among the heavenly beings. Those beings had offspring called the Nephilim, and there's no indication that this situation was ever changed. In fact, we're told specifically that Satan is still the god of this world and that he is the prince of the power of the air. When Satan tempted Jesus after his time in the desert, he offered him all sorts of things that pertain to the body, soul, and spirit. And Jesus never said, "You don't have that authority." He countered with scripture. Satan was trying to figure out what his plan was and responded according to some of the Psalms that he had never figured it out until after the crucifixion of Jesus, when Jesus went and told them, "This is what I did." Wherever you are in the world, and whatever your nation or people group is, there is a son of God who has been assigned to you. Some of them are evil, some of them are not. And they seem to be at war with one another, and they're at war with you too. And that's why it says, "Wherefore take unto you the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all to stand." Are you prepared for what's coming? Are you prepared for what's already happening? Do you see this evil going on in the world around you? Evil heavenly beings are out for one last onslaught, and you need to be prepared, and you need to help others prepare and to spread this message. And that last day is coming soon, brethren. Amen.